Hello and welcome to this session, and in this session we shall continue our understanding of the different types of nouns. Well, particularly in this session my focus shall be on the countable and the non-countable nouns. Well, in this session we definitely will have to understand as to why the countable nouns are called as the count nouns and why really the uncountable nouns are also called as the non-countable nouns or the mass nouns. Basically, in this session you shall get a complete clarity about these two types of nouns. So let me proceed. Have a look at this sentence. She bought one apple. Well, in this sentence, obviously, the word apple happens to be the noun. Well, not just is it a noun, I can also call it as the common noun, because here we are in general referring to a fruit called apple and we are not referring to any specific apple, and hence it is a common noun. But then I am sure you also understand that it is not just a common noun, it also happens to be a concrete noun. And I say this to be a concrete noun because after all you can perceive it through your sense organs. But then this session being a session on the countable and the uncountable nouns, what I would wish to say is that apple is also categorized as a countable noun. Well, why is it categorized as a countable noun? Well, you can count it as individual units. And such kind of nouns which can be counted as individual units is what we categorize as a countable noun. Well, that way, here we are counting the number of apples through the word one. After all, one is nothing but a number. In other words, what you are trying to do here is that you are trying to quantify the countable noun through a number. Well, that way, have a look at this example. She bought 3 apples. Well, again in this as well, apples happens to be a countable noun because just before that you can notice that we can quantify it using numbers, and here the number 3 has been used. Well, that way, have a look at this sentence. She bought several apples. No doubt, in this sentence as well, apples happens to be a countable noun, but then here the word several definitely is not a number. Then what is this word several? Well, this is what we call as a quantifier. In fact, here the number of apples is being quantified not by using a number but by using a quantifier. Well, that way, have a look at this sentence. She bought many apples. Again here, apples no doubt happens to be the countable noun, but then just prior to the apples word, what you have is again not a number but a quantifier, many. Well, that way I'm sure through all of these examples you have understood that countable nouns happen to be such nouns which can be counted as individual units, and hence they can be quantified either using a number or also they can be quantified by making use of quantifiers. Hope I am clear up until here. But then is it the same case with respect to the uncountable nouns? Well, let me explain it to you. Have a look at this sentence. She put sugar in her coffee. Well, in this sentence, the word sugar obviously happens to be the noun. But then not just is it a noun, it's also a common noun because we are not referring to any particular type of a sugar over here. Not just is it a common noun, it also happens to be a concrete noun because after all, using your sense organs, you can perceive sugar. But then all said and done, what I wanted you to understand here is that no doubt sugar is a concrete noun, but I cannot be calling it as a countable noun. It is an uncountable noun in the sense nobody can count sugar. Obviously, don't you think that it is indeed difficult to count sugar? Well, you may measure sugar in different ways, but then sugar cannot be counted as individual units. You know that previously that apples definitely can be counted as individual units, and hence we categorized it as the countable noun. But then here sugar is a concrete noun, but then it is not a countable noun because it cannot be counted as individual units. Well, since it cannot be counted as individual units, you cannot be quantifying it like this. Yes, the sentence she put 1 sugar in her coffee obviously is meaningless because here we cannot be using a number to quantify sugar because sugar happens to be an uncountable noun. Well, that way, have a look at this sentence. She put 5 sugars in her coffee. Obviously, here we cannot be using a number to quantify an uncountable noun. Obviously, sugars here is an uncountable noun, and hence both of these sentences are invalid. But then, can we really use quantifiers to quantify the uncountable nouns? What I mean to say is, have a look at this sentence. She put some sugar in her coffee. Well, this happens to be a valid English sentence. So, what I mean to say is that this word some is not a number, but then it is definitely a quantifier, and what in this sentence we are trying to do is that we are using a quantifier to quantify the uncountable noun, which is perfectly valid. Well, that way, have a look at this sentence that she put a little sugar in her coffee. Again, here, a little does not represent any particular number as such, rather it happens to be a quantifier, and such quantifications of an uncountable noun is definitely valid. So all said and done, I am sure that through these examples what you have been able to understand is that the uncountable nouns are such nouns which cannot be counted as individual units, and that the uncountable nouns cannot be quantified by numbers. However, they can definitely be quantified by using the quantifiers. Now, I am sure you have been able to understand this. Anyway, let me substantiate this further through an additional example. Have a look at this sentence. He has one car. Well, the word car here happens to be the countable noun in this sentence, because after all, you can count the number of cars as individual units, and obviously here the word one happens to be a number, and in this sentence the countable noun car is being quantified using a number. But then we can also be quantifying it like this. He has numerous cars. Well, you know that cars after all here also happens to be a countable noun, just that it is now being quantified by using a quantifier. After all, the word numerous happens to be a quantifier. In other words, I am sure that now you understand both of these points perfectly well. Now, have a look at this sentence. She gave me advice. Well, in this sentence, obviously the word advice happens to be a noun. Well, not just is it a noun, it is a common noun, because we do not know what is the specific advice that she has given. But then, not just is it a common noun, it also happens to be an abstract noun, because advice is something which you cannot perceive it using your 5 sense organs. Well, that way, advice is not just an abstract noun. Let me tell you that you cannot count it, and hence it is also an uncountable noun. Well, don't you think that advice is uncountable? You cannot obviously count it using numbers. Say, supposing I modify the sentence like this. She gave me one advice. Obviously, one here represents a number, and advice happens to be an uncountable noun which cannot be quantified using number, and hence this sentence itself is an invalid sentence. But then we can definitely quantify the uncountable nouns by making use of the quantifiers. Have a look at this sentence. She gave me some advice. Well, definitely this sentence is valid, because some over here happens to be the quantifier that can be used to quantify uncountable nouns. In other words, this definitely is a valid sentence. Not just this, have a look at this sentence. She gave me plenty of advice. Well, again here, plenty of happens to be a quantifier which we can definitely use with respect to the uncountable nouns. And so now if you would look back at these 2 points, I'm sure you have been able to completely understand it. But then there is one more difference between the countable and the uncountable nouns, that the countable nouns exist in both the singular as well as the plural forms, but then the uncountable nouns exist only in the singular forms and they do not have the plural forms. Well, what it means, let me explain it to you through examples. Have a look at this sentence. He has one car. Obviously, in this sentence, the word car happens to be the noun. Not just is it a noun, it happens to be a countable noun. But then I'm sure that in this sentence you are noticing that we are just referring to one car, and hence the word car happens to be a singular countable noun. But then have a look at this sentence, that he has numerous cars. Well, in this sentence as well, the word cars happens to be a countable noun, but then it is not a singular countable noun, rather it happens to be a plural countable noun. But then have a look at this sentence that she gave me some advice. Well, in this sentence, advice definitely happens to be a noun, but then an uncountable noun. That way, to be more specific, it happens to be a singular uncountable noun. And then if you happen to look at this sentence that she gave me plenty of advices, actually is an invalid sentence in English. And why is it invalid? That is because the word advices no doubt happens to be trying to represent itself as a plural uncountable noun, but then one thing that you need to remember is that the uncountable nouns do not exist in the plural form. The word advices is not there in the English vocabulary. In other words, all of the first three sentences are perfectly valid in English, but then this last sentence is invalid, and that is predominantly because that the countable nouns can exist in both the singular as well as the plural form, and the uncountable noun can exist only in the singular form. It cannot exist in the plural form. Well, that is what these points are also after all indicating. So let me substantiate this again through another example. Have a look at this sentence. She bought one apple. Obviously here apple happens to be a singular countable noun, but then have a look at this sentence that she bought several apples. Well, here the word apples happens to be a plural countable noun. That way, have a look at this sentence. She put some sugar in her coffee. Well, you know that the word sugar here happens to be an uncountable noun, but then it actually is treated as a singular uncountable noun. And now have a look at this sentence that she put some sugars in her coffee. Well, this sentence itself is an invalid sentence in English because the word sugars does not exist in the vocabulary of English. Well, sugars might sound to be a plural uncountable noun, but then what you need to understand is that the uncountable nouns cannot exist in the plural form. While sugar is valid, sugars definitely is invalid. And again, through these examples, what you have been able to understand is that the countable nouns can have both the singular and the plural forms, but then the uncountable noun can have only the singular form and the plural form does not exist. I hope I am clear with all of these points mentioned over here, but then there is still one more difference that you really need to be noticing. What I mean to say is that countable nouns can be used with both the definite articles and the indefinite articles, but then the uncountable nouns can be used only with the definite articles and not with the indefinite articles. Well, what do these points really mean? Let me explain. Even before I proceed with my explanation, firstly, what I need to tell you is to what an article is. Well, an article in English happens to be such words that are used to define a noun. Well, that way I shall be speaking about articles at great length moving forward, but at this point what I would wish to tell you is that there are two types of articles, mainly the definite article and the indefinite article. In fact, the word the happens to be a definite article because it is used whenever we want to specifically indicate to a particular noun. But then just in case the noun happens to be unspecific, then we can make use of either the article a or an, and hence they are called as the indefinite articles. Anyway, this bit of information I had to provide to you before clarifying as to what these 2 points are. I shall definitely substantiate these 2 points through my example, so let me proceed. Have a look at this sentence. I saw a cat in the garden. Well, obviously in this sentence, cat happens to be the countable noun, but then what I want you to notice is that it is associated with the article a. Well, you know that a happens to be an indefinite article, and through this example I wanted to highlight to you that the countable nouns can be used with the indefinite article. Well, that way have a look at this sentence that I saw the cat in the garden. Well, this is also a valid English sentence. After all, in this, the word cat happens to be the countable noun, but then what I want you to notice is that it is associated with the article the. And after all, the is an article, but then it happens to be a definite article. And what I really want you to notice is that even this sentence is valid in the sense that countable nouns can associate with the definite articles as well. In other words, I am sure that through this you have understood that the countable nouns can be associated with both the indefinite article as well as the definite article. But then, is it the same with respect to the uncountable nouns? Let me explain. Have a look at this sentence. Information you provided is helpful. Well, in this sentence, information happens to be the uncountable noun because it is really difficult to divide it into individual units and count it. So it is categorized as the uncountable noun. But then what I want you to notice is the article just before it. Well, it is associated with the article a, which happens to be an indefinite article, and due to this sentence itself is an invalid sentence. What I mean to say is that the uncountable nouns cannot be associated with the indefinite articles. Well, that way you know that a is not the only indefinite article. We also have an as the indefinite article, and in spite of the fact that you have used the indefinite article an over here, still the sentence is invalid because neither can you use a nor can you use an with an uncountable noun such as information. But then, can we use the? Well, have a look at this sentence. The information you provided is helpful. Well, again here, information happens to be an uncountable noun, and it is actually associated with the article the, which happens to be a definite article, and this sentence is perfectly valid. So what I mean to say is that while the uncountable nouns cannot be used with the indefinite articles, definitely the uncountable nouns can be used with the definite articles. So through all of these sentences, what you have been able to understand is that the countable nouns can be associated with both the indefinite as well as the definite articles, but then the uncountable nouns cannot be associated with the indefinite article. Rather, what they can be associated with is only the definite article. So I'm sure you have been able to understand this point as well. So all said and done, I'm sure that in this session you have been able to understand as to what really is the difference between the countable and the uncountable nouns, and you have got sufficient insights into this concept. Well, I would wish to end this session with a table for you that shall summarize your entire understanding of the session, and if you really have to understand more about the remaining types of nouns, all that you need to do is to meet me in my next session. Thanks for watching. Let's meet again in my next session.